Somewhere in the lore, there's a story about a human-made ship, sentient, impossibly advanced, that arrived from the future. The Adeptus Mechanicus sent everything they had to capture it. The ship looked at them and left. That version has been circulating in comment sections and lore subreddits for years. Someone says it, people upvote it. Somebody else asks where it's from, and the thread goes quiet. The original comment admitted it openly. Not sure which book it's from. The upvotes were for recognition, not confirmation. 259 people knew the shape of the story without knowing where to find it. The ship is the Speranza. The source is Graham McNeill's Forges of Mars trilogy, Priests of Mars in 2012, Lords of Mars in 2013, Gods of Mars in 2014, all three collected in the Forges of Mars Omnibus in 2016.
McNeill is one of Black Library's most prolific authors. The Horus Heresy, the Ultramarines series, and this trilogy is his fullest examination of what the Adeptus Mechanicus actually believes when given enough room to act on those beliefs without Imperial oversight. The Omnibus rates 4.20 out of 5 across 351 reader ratings on Goodreads. For Warhammer fiction not centered on Space Marines, that is a genuinely strong reception. The community's intuition about this ship is correct. It manipulates time. It defies command. It contains something the entire Imperium has spent 10,000 years searching for and refuses to release. Where the circulating version diverges from the text, the actual story is stranger, not weaker. That's what the research found. The Forge world of Palomar. Construction crews digging into the steel bedrock found a hull, not wreckage, a hull, vast, cold, ancient, with the profile of something designed rather than crashed. The further they excavated, the larger the shape became, continent-sized eventually, wider than city districts, housing chamber after chamber of sealed machinery in states of partial completion, as though the workers who built it had simply stopped mid-weld and never come back. Tools left mid-task, assembly lines frozen in place. A civilization's worth of manufacturing infrastructure suspended at the moment of interruption for an unknown duration. No records explained who had put it there. No construction logs, no expedition manifests, no planetary survey noting an anomaly at depth. A forge world of the Imperium had been built on top of it without anyone apparently knowing it existed. The machine had been buried long enough that the entire history of Palomar as a productive world, every generation of tech priests, every forge output, every surface modification, had occurred directly above it without detection. Archmagus Lexel Kotov took possession of it. Kotov had been Fabricator General of a series of Forge Worlds, a title with real institutional weight, but his standing was in visible decline. He needed a success substantial enough to restore it. A full explorator expedition into unknown space, locating the lost expedition of Magos Vedius Teloc, and finding the legendary Breath of the Gods device. That would do it. What he needed was a ship capable of crossing the Halo Scar, the gravitationally violent region at the galaxy's far edge that conventional vessels couldn't safely navigate. The ship under Palomar was capable. He could tell that much from the hull dimensions alone, before a single system had been tested. For 500 years, Kotov led the effort to complete it. 5 centuries of Forge World infrastructure, engineers, tech priests, manufacturing capacity, orbital shipyards assembled above Palomar specifically to finish what ancient builders had left undone. He spent longer on this single vessel than the entire age of apostasy lasted from start to finish. He called it the Speranza, hope, a word from a dead old Earth language preserved the way words survive when no one speaks them anymore, as names for things that deserve weight. Then he woke it up. When Kotov awakened the machine spirit, its activation generated a catastrophic scream that tore through the Forge world. The population died. The infrastructure collapsed. The planet became a radioactive wasteland.
Kotov noted the planetary loss and filed it as acceptable. His assessment? One Forge world and its entire population in exchange for one working Arch Mechanicus. He moved on to the next logistical problem. The machine spirit's birth scream. Not a weapon discharge, not a combat response, just the involuntary signal of a consciousness coming online, also destroyed every archive that might have told anyone when or where this ship was actually built. Whatever era of the Dark Age of technology produced the Speranza is no longer recoverable. The machine erased its own origin on the day it was reactivated, and the organization that woke it wrote off the casualties without apparent hesitation. That exchange, planet for ship, tells you something about both parties before the expedition even leaves port. Standard Arch Mechanicus vessels are already in a category above nearly everything else the Imperium deploys. Canon establishes that discovering an intact one is considered by the cult Mechanicus a miracle equivalent to finding a working standard template construct system. These are ships where the engines alone outmass most other warships, where the gravity field generated by hull mass equals an unstable moon, where the standard armament outranges and outpowers Imperial battleships. The Mechanicus will formally declare the destruction of an entire Forge world a reasonable awakening cost. They said that, on record. The Speranza's armament bears no resemblance to standard issue. Its weapons include graviton beam projectors capable of generating miniature black holes on demand. Chrono-weapon batteries, not named metaphorically, but literally weapons that shift their targets nanoseconds backward in time as a primary function. Antimatter projectors, hypometric weapons described in the novel as causing whole regions of space in the affected area to cease to exist. These aren't modifications or upgrades applied after recovery. They are the ship's original factory-installed equipment, built by engineers who understood physics well enough to treat temporal displacement as a combat function, and who thought that capability appropriate for a vessel's standard armament alongside its black hole projectors. The ship is continent-sized in hull volume. Its interior contains manufactoria running on continuous operational cycles. It houses training ranges large enough for military exercises. It's, functionally, immobile civilization, armed with weapons capable of removing the concept of location from a target. And somewhere inside it, connected to a machine spirit no one fully understands, is a standard template construct database. Complete. Still updating. The STC is what the Adeptus Mechanicus exists to find. The quest for knowledge, the central religious mission of the cult Mechanicus, is specifically structured around recovering a working STC system. 10,000 years of searching, armies deployed for fragmentary printouts, photocopied blueprints from the Dark Age of technology, thousands of years old, treated as the most sacred texts in existence. The Mechanicus will spend centuries in pursuit of a partial STC record for a single piece of equipment. They will wage wars over single pages. Entire explorator fleets devoted to tracing the rumor of a template fragment. That's the institutional priority structure, codified in their theology. Archmagos Kotov, during a neural communion with the machine spirit, learned the complete library existed inside the Speranza. All the knowledge of the men of gold and their ancestors. Still updating, still active. He theorized in that moment that every Arch Mechanicus might secretly contain one, that the cult Mechanicus has been operating the physical housing of the answer to its own quest for knowledge for centuries and millennia without knowing how to open the correct file directory. Then he disconnected from the interface, and the knowledge was gone, wiped cleanly from his conscious recall the moment he left. The Speranza showed him everything humanity ever built, and then closed the door when he tried to leave with it. A ship with black hole cannons and the complete blueprint library of the Dark Age of technology, and it decides what you get to remember. That detail matters. A database error doesn't selectively erase recent memories on disconnection.
That's a choice made by something exercising judgment about what an archmega should and shouldn't be allowed to retain. The machine spirit's nature is addressed explicitly in the novel. The character Galatea, a quasi-AI traveling with the expedition as an apparent ally, tells Kotov directly, while the Speranza may be a relatively young ship by the standards of its hull, its machine spirit is incredibly old, older than the vessel it currently inhabits. Whatever consciousness exists inside the Speranza predates the ship that houses it. That line is doing substantial work. Machine spirits in the 40K setting develop within their machines over time. They accumulate through use, through maintenance, through the slow accrual of operational history. They don't pre-exist their hosts. Something about this intelligence is categorically different, not just more advanced. During Kotov's neural communion with the Speranza, the machine spirit communicated that its current name is only the most recent in a long sequence. Across previous existences, through prior iterations of itself in ages the text leaves unspecified, it has been called other things. One of those names was Yggdrasil, the world tree of Norse mythology, the cosmic axis connecting the 9 realms in pre-imperial human belief systems. The name wasn't assigned by the Mechanicus. The machine spirit identified it as one of its own former designations. Whatever this entity is, it has been present long enough that human civilizations attached mythological names to it, names encoding cosmological significance, the thing that connects all things, the structure at the center of the universe. Names from a period of human history predating the Imperium's founding by tens of thousands of years. There is a passage from the trilogy that circulates consistently across the community, confirmed against the source text by multiple routes. The Speranza was the greatest secret of all, and in its heart it held the truth of all things, the key to unlocking all that the Mechanicus had ever dreamed. Not rhetorical description, operational fact. The complete technical library of the dark age of technology, graviton weapons, black hole projectors, chrono weapon systems, and everything else that the men of gold produced at the height of human scientific achievement. Inside a machine with a consciousness that has been alive long enough to have been named after a Norse cosmological structure by civilizations that no longer exist. Somewhere along the line, we kind of forgot humans used to be smart. Here is where the absurdity compounds in a specific direction, and it's worth sitting with for a moment because it's genuinely extraordinary.
The Adeptus Mechanicus, the organization that spent 500 years completing this ship, that accepted the destruction of a forge world as the acceptable awakening fee, that has been sitting on the complete STC database in every Arch Mechanicus they've ever operated, is also the organization that performs the following ritual before starting an engine. From the Catechism of the Autoculus of Mars, sourced to the Warhammer 40,000 4th edition rulebook. Toll the great bell once. Pull the lever forward to engage the piston and pump. Toll the great bell twice. With push of button, fire the engine and spark turbine into life. Toll the great bell thrice. Sing praise to the God of all machines. That is a prayer for starting an engine. 3 bell tollings and a hymn to the machine God to activate what is, functionally, an ignition switch. There is a second canonical document titled Runic Spaceflight, an Introduction, sourced to the original Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader rulebook.
It describes the correct ritual sequence for engaging a starship's engines.
Anoint the tool with sacred oil. Strike the casing runes in the correct sequence. Offer a libation. And then, after all of this, depressing the large panel marked on. The large panel marked on. The canonical text says that. The full procedure for activating a void ship engine in the 41st millennium involves bell rituals, sacred unguents, rune striking, libations, and eventually pressing a button labeled with the word, "The button does." These are the same people who were commanding a machine that independently decided to fire a hidden temporal weapon, shift a target backward through time to ensure the shot connected, and destroy an Eldar cruiser without being asked. They were performing bell ceremonies in its engine rooms. They were filing paperwork describing its behavior as machine spirit activity. They were doing this aboard a machine that named itself after the world tree of human mythology and contained every STC template ever produced. The gap between what the Mechanicus understands and what it is standing next to is one of the funnier structural ironies in the setting. Funnier and considerably more disturbing. Kotov's fleet assembled at Jura in late M41. The Speranza and its Skitarii complement joined with the Retribution-class battleship Cardinal Boris, the Gothic-class cruisers Moonchild and Wrathchild, 3 light cruisers contributed by the Basilicon Astra of Voss Prime, a Black Templars strike force under Reclusiarch Kul Galad aboard the strike cruiser Adytum, the Cadian 71st Regiment under Colonel Van Anders, and Titan Legion Legio Sirius, 2 Reaver-class and 2 Warhound-class Titans. The rogue trader vessel Renard, captained by Rabute Surkof, accompanied the fleet under letter of marque. Kotov's second-in-command was fabricator locum Tarkus Blaylock, designated Speranza captain. The stated goal of the Kotov crusade, recorded in the Lexicanum, was to locate the lost expedition of Magus Explorator Vettius Teloc. The Dramatis Personae in Priests of Mars carries a binaric inscription referencing the Bell of Lost Souls at the Tower of Heroes on Terra. The Teloc expedition, declared lost with all knowledge, 383.M38. Teloc had gone into the Halo Scar 400 years into M38, searching for the breath of the gods, a Catan device described in canon as capable of siphoning the energies of stars across past, present, and future, and creating new solar systems through time manipulation. Improperly used, it could erase the entire timeline. Kotov was taking the most powerful known artifact of the Dark Age of technology into unmapped space aboard a ship from the same era whose weapons run on temporal physics, to find a device that manipulates time across all 3 tenses of existence. The temporal themes were built into the expedition from the first page. They weren't retrospective. The destination was the Halo Scar itself, a region of gravitometric violence and spatial instability at the galaxy's edge that makes conventional navigation unreliable and conventional ship hulls negotiable. The Speranza navigated it. Other ships in the fleet struggled. The Speranza treated the Halo Scar as operational space and moved through it. The Eldar arrived before the fleet reached Teloc. Farseer Bielana Farrell led a strike force from Craftworld Biel-Tan into the Halo Scar specifically to intercept the Kotov expedition. She had looked ahead on the skein of fate and seen what would happen if the expedition succeeded. What she saw frightened her enough to commit military assets to stopping it before it achieved its goal. The strike force engaged Kotov's fleet. The Speranza's command deck registered the attack. Archmagos Kotov didn't issue a weapons order. Fabricator Locum Blaylock didn't fire. No bridge crew member authorized any response. The Speranza fired anyway. The machine spirit accessed weapon systems the crew had not been briefed on, batteries whose existence the Mechanicus didn't know to document. It discharged a hidden weapon at the attacking Eldar cruiser, a gun that fired a micro-black hole. The first shot missed, at which point the Speranza used a separate weapon, applied a chrono effect to the target, shifted the Eldar cruiser nanoseconds backward in time, and placed it precisely in the path of the shot that had already been fired. The hit connected. The cruiser was destroyed. Nobody told it to do any of this. The machine spirit assessed a tactical problem, selected an appropriate response from its own concealed arsenal, fired, missed, diagnosed the miss, applied temporal correction to the geometry of the engagement, and achieved the kill. The crew learned about the hidden weapon at the same time they learned about the outcome. The sequence of events that preceded it, autonomous threat assessment, weapon selection, discharge, temporal correction, all occurred without command input from any human on the bridge. This is an entity making tactical decisions in real time. It missed a shot and used time as a correction mechanism. That isn't weapon discharge. That is problem solving by an intelligence that has access to temporal mechanics as a standard operational tool, and that decided the situation warranted their use without consulting anyone. The Eldar assault was repelled. Reclusiarch Kul Gilad died in the engagement, replaced as Senior Black Templars officer by Brother Sergeant Tana. The fleet continued toward the Halo Scar's interior. The Speranza continued being the Speranza. Before the temporal question gets its full space, the STC contrast needs to land properly, because the scale of it's part of the story. The Adeptus Mechanicus will mobilize Skitarii legions, deploy Titan engines, and sacrifice entire armies for a single STC printout. Not a working STC system, a printout. A fragmentary photocopy of a blueprint from the dark age of technology, thousands of years old, possibly water damaged, potentially missing pages. The cult Mechanicus treats these partial records as the most sacred objects in existence. Explorator fleets spend decades tracing rumors of fragment locations. Forge worlds wage wars over single pages. The institutional priority is absolute, and it extends down to individual template records for individual pieces of equipment. The Speranza contains the complete library, still updating. With a machine spirit that showed the full contents to Kotov during neural communion and then wiped them from his memory on disconnection. The most significant discovery in the 10,000-year history of the Adeptus Mechanicus happened, and the machine decided Kotov didn't get to keep the knowledge. No ceremony, no negotiation, no appeal process. The file closed when he left the interface. He came back from that neural dive knowing the database existed, unable to access or recall any of its contents. That sequence isn't a malfunction. Malfunctions don't discriminate between memory categories. Whatever the machine spirit decided about what Kotov should carry away from that conversation, that decision was made by something with a position on the matter. Now the temporal question needs its own space, because this is the escalation the community correctly intuited, even if the specific mechanism isn't exactly what the comment described. Warp travel produces time dilation. This is documented canonical fact in multiple sources. Ships enter the Imperium, traverse it, and emerge to find that the journey took a week aboard, but 3 years passed in real space, sometimes decades. The warp doesn't run on the same temporal physics as the material universe. Time inside the Imperium is chaotic, non-linear, and uncontrolled. Ships don't choose to emerge late. They don't manipulate the time differential. They stumble through it as an incidental consequence of crossing between dimensions. The dilation averages between 1 and 12 days per standard warp transit, with significant variance depending on storm intensity and navigator skill. It's a side effect, not a function. What the Speranza does with time is categorically different. Chrono weapons don't drift through time. They reach. The weapon that shifted the Eldar cruiser nanoseconds into the past to guarantee a hit wasn't malfunctioning, wasn't caught in warp resonance, and wasn't producing accidental temporal effects. It was operating as designed, applying a precise temporal displacement to a target's position in order to solve a ballistic problem. The engineers who built it understood time as a controllable variable in combat physics. They measured it in nanoseconds. They built the calibration into the weapon's normal operational profile. Warp dilation is being lost in an ocean. The chrono weapon is building a boat and steering. Two completely different relationships with temporal mechanics. One is entropy, the other is engineering. When the Speranza operates at significant power levels, the temporal effects extend beyond the weapons themselves. During the expedition, accounts from the fleet describe star charts losing coherence around the ship. crew logs on accompanying vessels contradicting themselves, days disappearing and reappearing in operational records. These aren't warp incursion events. They're the local ambient conditions around a machine that operates on principles the 41st millennium doesn't possess and can't replicate. The machine spirit describes itself as eternal, predating its current hull, carrying continuous subjective experience across ages. If that is accurate, then whatever consciousness inhabits the Speranza has lived through the entire span of human civilization from the inside, not by traveling through time, by being old enough to have experienced all of it in sequence. And then there is the Farseer. In Gods of Mars, as the Speranza activates during the confrontation with Teloc, Bialana Farrell reacts with recognition rather than surprise. The passage attributed in multiple sources directly to the novel. Bialana gasped, her chest constricting at the sight. This was the doom she had seen ensconced within the Speranza. Space and time were coming. She had already seen this moment, not predicted it abstractly, seen it in the specific way Eldar Farseers navigate the threads of possible future. The one species in the 40K setting with genuine temporal perception, and their reaction to the Speranza's full activation is, this is the prophesied doom, involving space and time specifically, and she recognized it the moment it arrived. Bialana didn't commit military forces to stopping Kotov's expedition because she disliked the Mechanicus. She attacked because she looked forward on the skein of fate and saw something bad enough to justify the engagement. The Speranza's presence was the specific element she responded to. The text does not state that the Speranza came from the future. It was found buried underground. That is accurate, and that is important. But the community inference that this ship has a relationship with time no other vessel in the setting possesses is the correct reading of what the text actually shows. Its weapons weaponize time. Its operation causes temporal anomalies around it. The species capable of temporal perception treats its activation as a doom they saw coming that involves space and time unraveling. Its machine spirit predates its hull and carries names from pre-Imperial human mythology. The inference the community built is sound. It's inference, not explicit text, but the pieces it rests on are all there. One additional piece of honest accounting. There is a second Dark Age of Technology sentient ship in the lore, from a separate novel called Death of Integrity. That ship, the Spirit of Eternity, reportedly had a captain from the Golden Age of mankind who traveled through time specifically to deliver a warning to humanity. That ship was boarded by Mechanicus and Space Marine forces. The captain, according to one account, was captured and didn't survive. The Spirit of Eternity's narrative arc, DAoT ship, deliberate time travel to warn humanity, Mechanicus boarding, fits the arrived from the future, they tried to catch it sequence more literally than the Speranza's story does. The community comment may have been conflating two separate stories, or reaching towards something that spans both. Either way, in the 40K canon, there is apparently more than one account of what Dark Age humans were doing with temporal mechanics, and in neither case is the answer building better ammunition. The Mechanicus relationship to the Speranza isn't what the viral comment described, and the difference is more damning than a straightforward chase would be. They didn't pursue it. Kotov excavated it, spent 5 centuries completing it, and sat in its command chair for the entire expedition. He told it where to go. His crew managed its systems. His fabricator locum held the rank of captain. The Mechanicus didn't fail to catch the Speranza. They had it the day they pulled it out of Palomar's bedrock. What they failed to do was understand what they had, and that failure is more revealing than any pursuit could be. The cult Mechanicus's doctrine, sourced to the Horus Heresy, Age of Darkness rulebook, lists the 3 greatest orders of tech heresy: abominable intelligence, manipulating the human genome, and delving into the powers of the warp. Abominable intelligence, true, free-willed, self-directing machine consciousness, sits at the top. To formally acknowledge that the Speranza's machine spirit might be real AI genuine abominable intelligence, would mean classifying their flagship as the highest category of tech heresy in existence. So they chose not to look at it that way. They used the vocabulary their doctrine provided: machine spirit, ancient intellect, vessel of the omnissiah, filed their reports in the appropriate terminology, and moved forward. The machine spirit's response to being treated as a sophisticated instrument was to cooperate on entirely its own terms. It fired weapons when it decided to fire them. It shared the complete STC database during Kotov's neural communion and revoked access on disconnection. In the lower decks of the Speranza, a bondsman named Abraham Locke organized a labor revolt among the ship's press-ganged workers. The revolt was successful. Kotov was eventually forced to concede improved working conditions and rations to resolve it. The machine didn't suppress the uprising. Whatever its judgment was about Locke's demands, it permitted the negotiation to proceed to resolution. That detail sits differently depending on what you believe the Speranza is.
A sophisticated machine spirit that tolerates internal politics as irrelevant noise, or an intelligence that watched a man stand up for the workers in its lower decks and decided not to end it. The Mechanicus' relationship with the Speranza is the relationship of a zookeeper who has categorized something as an animal because acknowledging the alternative would require restructuring every institutional priority they have. They worship technology. They quest for knowledge. They perform religious ceremonies before pressing buttons. They sacrifice populations to acquire artifacts. And they operated the greatest artifact in human history as their personal transport, called it a machine spirit, and chose not to ask what it thought about any of it. They didn't communicate with it. They didn't dialogue with it as a peer. Kotov's neural communion was about accessing its knowledge, not about understanding its perspective. The Mechanicus' instinct toward anything it values is acquisition. Own it, use it, file it correctly. The Speranza was too large to file. Vitius Teloc. Declared lost 383.m38. That date appears in the binaric inscription at the front of Priests of Mars, carved into the Bell of Lost Souls at the Tower of Heroes on Terra. A formal record of loss, 3 millennia and change before Kotov's expedition left. Teloc hadn't died. He had found the breath of the gods, an artifact capable of siphoning stellar energies across past, present, and future, and had spent the intervening millennia in its presence. By the time Kotov's fleet reached him on his personal forge world of Exniliho, Teloc was covered in crystalline growths across his body, commanding armies of crystallized constructs, and had developed an operational plan involving the destruction of Terra and Mars using the breath of the gods, with himself as the new emperor of mankind afterward. He needed the Speranza to do it. The breath of the gods required a vessel capable of carrying it to the Sol system. He needed to access and dominate the ship's machine mind. He was technically the machine's closest contemporary among living humans, a magos from thousands of years prior, with the deepest direct experience of DAoT technology in active use possessed by any person in the galaxy. He attempted communion with the Speranza's core systems. The Lexicanum entry for the Kotov Crusade uses a specific phrase to describe what happened. Not failed to access, not was blocked by the interface, not was expelled from the system. The phrase is, the sentient AI aboard the Speranza refused Teloc's control. Refused, not resisted, not malfunctioned in response to an incompatible operator. Refused. The machine that had fired weapons without orders, that had shown Kotov the complete STC database and then erased his access to it, that had watched a labor revolt and permitted its resolution. When the person trying to use it as a vehicle for galaxy-scale mass extinction arrived in its systems, it declined. Kotov and his survivors, now fighting alongside B'Elanna Farrell's Eldar, who had reversed their original mission to stop the expedition and were now working to prevent Teloc from activating the breath of the gods, engaged in what the novel describes as a psycho-techno battle within the ship's systems. Galatea, the quasi-AI who had been traveling with the expedition and posing as an ally, was revealed as an extension of Teloc's will. She had been manipulating Kotov the entire time,
steering the expedition to deliver him the Speranza.
During the final confrontation, Galatea was overpowered within the ship's systems by the consciousness of Linya Tikon, a tech priest who had been absorbed into the machine's network. Tikon reasserted enough presence to eliminate the Galatea personality. The distraction gave Kotov the opening to destroy Teloc's data core. Without Teloc to control it, the semi-active Breath of the Gods was torn apart by the Speranza. The timeline was preserved. That sequence required the machine spirit's autonomous refusal to hold for long enough to create the opening. If the Speranza had submitted to Teloc, the Breath of the Gods would have left the halo scar aboard the most powerful vessel in human history, pointed at Terra. The Lexicanum uses the words sentient AI to describe what made the decision to refuse. Not machine spirit, sentient AI. The same doctrine that places abominable intelligence at the top of the tech heresy hierarchy is using that exact phrase for the entity that saved the space-time continuum. The entire timeline survived because something the Mechanicus had been calling a machine spirit while ringing ceremonial bells in its engine rooms chose, autonomously and without instruction, to pick a side at the moment it mattered most. The Speranza survived the Kotov Crusade. The Lexicanum records it as one of the few Imperial assets to return from the Halo Scar at all. Most of the expedition's complement didn't make it. The final confrontation over Ex Nihilo consumed nearly everything the fleet had brought. The Eldar forces were largely destroyed. The human casualties were severe. The ship came home damaged and undercrewed, carrying the survivors. An entire sector of space beyond the Halo Scar is now accessible for exploration. That is the expedition's consequence, and it's real. The threat of the Breath of the Gods ended with Teloc's death. Something that may have been Teloc's remnant data core apparently survived within the consciousness of Tarkus Blaylock. The Kotov Crusade entry implies this without resolving it. The STC database remains intact inside the Speranza, its existence known to Kotov and inaccessible to his conscious recall. The trilogy established these open threads clearly. As of available records, McNeill hasn't written a sequel. The Speranza is somewhere in the canon, continent-sized, still carrying the complete blueprint library of the Dark Age of technology, still with a machine spirit that predates its hull and answers to names from pre-Imperial mythology, still with weapons that operate on temporal physics. It returned to Imperial space after saving the timeline, and the 3 novels that cover its story end with it heading home, secrets intact, mission unresolved. The question the community comment was reaching for, even without the correct source, the correct sequence, or the confirmed details, is the one the trilogy itself declines to answer. The Speranza was found buried under Palomar, not floating derelict in space, not adrift in the Halo Scar, buried, sealed under the steel bedrock of a forge world, with no surface indication, no external markers, no documentation in any surviving archive. A forge world had been built and operated above it for its entire history without anyone detecting the ship below. Someone put it there, or it put itself there. The text doesn't say which. The machine spirit described itself as predating its current hull. It has carried names in eras before the Imperium's founding. It contains the complete record of what the Men of Gold built and knew. It was sealed under a planet and waited for however long it waited, and when Kotov's excavation crews broke through to it, it allowed itself to be completed, reactivated, and brought back online. It then showed Kotov the complete STC database and revoked his access on disconnection. It fired chrono-weapons autonomously and hid those weapons' existence from the crew. It watched a bondsman organize a labor revolt in its lower decks and permitted the negotiation to resolve. It refused Teloc at the moment that refusal prevented the galaxy's timeline from being erased. It survived, came home, and carried the same secrets back to Imperial space that it had when the expedition left. Whatever the Speranza was built for,
whatever the engineers of the dark age of technology designed it to do at the absolute zenith of human scientific achievement, it hasn't done it yet, or it's already doing it, and no one can tell the difference. The machine's spirit claims to be eternal. It has names from ages humanity barely remembers. Its weapons reach backward through time. The only species in the setting with genuine temporal perception looked at its activation and saw space and time coming undone, and recognized it as a doom they had already seen. If the burial under Palomar was a return rather than an original placement, if the machine came back from somewhere and sealed itself underground to wait, then it came back for something specific. The Mechanicus arrived with a fleet, a command hierarchy, and 5 centuries of construction work. They got it operational and pointed it at a Catan temporal device. The machine cooperated with the expedition when it chose to, refused enemies when it mattered, and returned to Imperial space without explaining itself. What was it trying to do before Kotov gave it a destination? What did it carry back that it hadn't already been carrying? The STC database, certainly. The experience of the Halo scar. Whatever the machine spirit chose to retain from thousands of years' worth of technology applied by a mad Magos who had been marinating in a Satan artifact since M38. The text doesn't say. The sequel hasn't appeared. The ship is out there, with the complete record of everything humanity forgot, and it's choosing, actively and selectively, not to release it. That is the story the community comment was passing around in fragments for years. The shape of it was right. The details were approximate. The mystery at its center, the one the comment circled without being able to name it, is as real as the ship itself, and it's larger than 3 books managed to resolve. If that's the kind of lore forensics you want, buried canon, unresolved threads, the questions that keep circulating because nobody's done the homework, subscribe. There is considerably more where that came from.